Hello, Gemini. This energy feels intense already. Somebody has been trying very hard to stay logical about you, but it's not working anymore. The more they try to push their feelings aside, the more you seem to take over their thoughts. Okay, this person may act calm on the outside, but inside, there is a constant conversation happening about you. They keep replaying old messages, old moments, and things they wish they had said differently. And the question is, why are they still thinking about you this much? Why can't they seem to move on when they've tried so hard to convince themselves that they should? Wow, because what they feel for you goes deeper than they expected. This connection has gotten under their skin. It challenges them. It excites them. And honestly, it scares them a little too. Somebody here is realizing that no matter how much they analyze these feelings, they still can't explain why you keep showing up in their mind. And that's where this reading begins. The moment I look deeper into this energy, I keep coming back to the same feeling. This person cannot stop thinking about you, Gemini. And the strange thing is, I don't even feel like they're trying to hold on to you on purpose anymore. It feels bigger than that. It feels automatic. Like their mind keeps circling back to you whether they want it to or not. Okay, because I'm looking at the Page of Swords right away, and this energy feels restless. Somebody keeps revisiting conversations. They keep replaying things that were said, things that weren't said, the way you responded, the way you looked at them. Even little details that most people would have forgotten by now somehow remain vivid in their mind. You know what's interesting? I don't feel like they're only missing you. I feel like they're trying to understand you. Those are two very different things. Because missing someone comes from the heart. Trying to understand someone comes from the mind. And this person seems trapped somewhere in between. They keep asking themselves questions. Why did Gemini say that? What did they really mean? Were they protecting themselves? Were they trying to tell me something? Did I misunderstand them? It's almost like every answer creates three new questions. And instead of finding clarity, they find themselves becoming even more fascinated by you. Wow. The more they think, the deeper they go. The more they analyze, the more mysterious you become. I feel like there was a time when they thought they had you figured out. Maybe they believed they understood your personality. Maybe they thought they knew what you wanted. But now, not anymore. Now you feel unpredictable to them, complex, layered, almost impossible to fully read. And that's exactly what keeps pulling them back. Because the energy around the magician feels very strong here. Every time they think they're finally moving on, something reminds them of you. A phrase, a song, a random memory, a familiar expression. Suddenly you're back in their thoughts again. Not because they're trying to summon you, but because you never really left. You became part of their internal dialogue, part of the way they process life right now. And honestly, Gemini, I feel like this frustrates them more than they would ever admit. Because this person wants explanations. They want logic. They want certainty. But their feelings for you refuse to stay inside neat little boxes. Instead, everything feels messy, complicated, unfinished. And that's why I keep feeling this pull toward the Queen of Swords. This person keeps trying to stay rational. They keep telling themselves to focus on facts, focus on reality, focus on what they can prove. But every time they try to approach you logically, their emotions slip back into the conversation. It's like they're arguing with themselves. One side says, "Stop thinking about Gemini." The other side immediately responds, "Okay, but what if there's more to this?" Then the cycle starts all over again, over and over, day after day. And for some of you, this may even be someone who acts completely unaffected on the outside, someone who appears calm, collected, busy, maybe even detached. But internally, their mind is working overtime. Because the idea of Pentacles energy feels almost obsessive here. Not in a dangerous way. More like someone becoming completely absorbed by a subject they can't stop studying. Except the subject is you, your behavior, your choices, your silence, your energy. Everything about you feels like a puzzle they haven't solved yet. And I keep hearing this thought in my head. Why can't I stop thinking about this person? That's what keeps echoing. Not because they don't know you're important. Deep down, they already know that. The real question they're struggling with is why your presence still feels so strong. Why you still occupy space in their mind when they thought enough time had passed. Why they still feel curious. Why they still want answers. Why they still care. Because no matter how much they try to redirect their attention somewhere else, something keeps bringing them back. And the truth is, I don't think they're ready to admit how much mental space you've actually been taking up. Not yet. They're still trying to convince themselves that this is only curiosity, only unfinished thoughts, only questions that need answers. But the energy sitting underneath all of that feels much deeper than simple curiosity. And the more they continue pulling on that thread, the more they're going to discover feelings they weren't planning to face. And that's exactly where this energy starts becoming frustrating for them. Because once someone realizes their feelings run deeper than they expected, they usually have two choices. They can accept those feelings, or they can fight them. And honestly, this person has been fighting. I keep looking at the Five of Wands, and it feels like an internal battle that never really ends. One moment they tell themselves they're fine. The next moment they're irritated for absolutely no reason, only to realize you're on their mind again. It's almost like they're angry that you still have this effect on them. Not because you've done anything wrong. Not because you're chasing them. Not because you're demanding their attention. The frustration is coming from the fact that they cannot fully control what they feel. And this person likes control. They like understanding what's happening inside their own head. They like having explanations. But when it comes to you, Gemini, everything feels less predictable. Okay, let me explain what I'm seeing. There are moments when they genuinely try to redirect their focus. They throw themselves into work, into responsibilities, into daily routines, into anything that can keep their mind occupied. For a little while, it works. They convince themselves they're moving forward. They convince themselves they're gaining distance. But somehow, you find your way back into the conversation happening inside their mind. A memory appears out of nowhere. Something reminds them of your voice, your laugh, a specific conversation, and suddenly they're right back where they started. You know, I don't even think they're telling many people about this. This feels private, very private. Because the Two of Swords energy feels like someone standing in front of a truth they don't want to fully acknowledge yet. They're aware of what's happening. They just don't like it. And there's a difference. It's not confusion, it's resistance. They know they miss you. They know they're thinking about you. They know this connection still affects them. The problem is that admitting it would force them to confront emotions they've been trying to organize, label, and contain. Wow. And I keep hearing this energy of, no, I'm not doing this again. But every time they say that to themselves, their heart seems to answer with something completely different. That's where the tension is. That's where the exhaustion comes from. Because fighting feelings requires energy. Pretending not to care requires energy. Trying to stay emotionally detached requires energy. And lately, I don't think they have much energy left for that fight. The Nine of Swords feels incredibly loud here. There are thoughts they cannot switch off. Questions that keep showing up. Regrets they don't particularly enjoy looking at. And I don't necessarily feel like they're losing sleep every night. For some of you, maybe. But for many of you, it feels more like mental exhaustion. The kind that follows someone throughout the day. The kind where they're driving somewhere and suddenly they're thinking about you. The kind where they're trying to focus on a conversation and part of their attention drifts somewhere else. Back towards you. Back toward the connection. Back toward everything they thought they had under control. And what's fascinating is that the harder they try to suppress it, the stronger it becomes. Because the energy surrounding the devil feels less like obsession with you and more like obsession with their own inability to let go. That realization irritates them. It challenges their pride. It forces them to ask questions they don't particularly want answers to. Why am I still feeling this? Why am I still emotionally attached? Why do I care so much? Why does Gemini still matter? And every time they reach those questions, something inside them becomes uncomfortable. Because deep down, they know the answers aren't simple. This isn't about a passing attraction. This isn't about boredom. This isn't about loneliness. Something about you touched a place inside them that refuses to go quiet. And I feel like they're becoming increasingly aware of that fact. Not comfortable with it. Not completely accepting of it. Just aware. Aware enough to feel frustrated. Aware enough to feel vulnerable. Aware enough to realize that all the logic in the world hasn't been able to erase what they feel. And the more that truth starts settling in, the harder it becomes for them to keep pretending that this connection hasn't changed them. And that's where the energy starts shifting from something they can explain into something they can only feel. Because what I'm picking up now doesn't feel mental anymore. It feels physical, emotional, magnetic, almost impossible for them to ignore. I just pulled the Ace of Wands into this story and the atmosphere changes immediately. The tension becomes stronger. The connection becomes more alive. It's like this person suddenly becomes aware of how much they miss your presence, not just your words, your energy, your smile, the way you carry yourself, the way a room feels different when you're in it. And honestly, Gemini, I don't think they were prepared for that realization. Because it's one thing to miss talking to someone. It's another thing entirely to miss their entire existence. You know? This person keeps finding themselves remembering details they never expected to matter so much. The sound of your voice, The look in your eyes when you were serious. The look in your eyes when you were laughing. Even the small moments, the ordinary moments, those are the memories that seem to stay with them the longest. And what's interesting is that they don't seem to have complete control over when these memories appear. One second, they're focused on something else. The next second, they're somewhere in the past, replaying a moment with you. Wow. The lovers keep showing up around this energy, and it feels incredibly personal. Because what they're experiencing isn't surface-level attraction. It's not just about appearance. It's not just about chemistry. It's the combination of everything. Your mind, your personality, your confidence, your vulnerability, your flaws, your strengths. It's like every piece of who you are somehow became attractive to them. And I think that's part of what makes this situation so overwhelming. Because if it were only physical attraction, they could dismiss it. If it were only emotional attachment, they could rationalize it. But this feels layered. It feels like multiple forms of attraction happening at the same time. That's why they keep getting pulled back in. Okay, I have to say this. There are thoughts they haven't shared with anyone. Thoughts they haven't even fully admitted to themselves. Private fantasies. Private wishes. Private moments where they imagine what it would feel like to be close to you again. Not because they're trying to escape reality, but because your energy still feels very present inside their world, and the Knight of Wands energy feels intense, restless, impulsive, almost impatient, like part of them wants to stop overthinking and simply act, because overanalyzing hasn't given them peace. Avoidance hasn't given them peace. Distance hasn't given them peace. So now they're stuck with this growing awareness that what they feel isn't disappearing. In fact, it seems to be getting stronger. The more time passes, the harder it becomes to pretend otherwise. And that's where I feel this internal conflict starting to evolve. Because attraction creates vulnerability. And vulnerability is something they've been trying to manage very carefully, especially with you. Especially because your opinion matters more than they want to admit. Your presence affects them more than they want to admit. Your absence affects them more than they want to admit. And suddenly, all of those feelings become impossible to separate from one another. The physical attraction, the emotional connection, the curiosity, the longing, it all starts blending together. The strength card feels very important here. Not because I feel strength coming from force, but because I feel restraint. This person has been holding back far more than you realize. Holding back conversations, holding back admissions, holding back reactions, holding back emotions. And sometimes people assume that silence means absence of feeling. But that's not what this energy feels like at all. This feels like somebody trying very hard not to reveal how deeply they're affected. Trying very hard not to expose just how much space you've occupied inside their heart. Because once those feelings are spoken out loud, everything changes. And I keep feeling them standing right at the edge of that realization. No longer able to dismiss the attraction. No longer able to reduce it to simple curiosity. No longer able to convince themselves that you're just another person passing through their life. Something feels different now. Something feels stronger. And the closer they get to accepting that truth, the more difficult it becomes to keep hiding behind distance, silence, or control. Because once someone stops focusing on what they feel in the moment, they eventually start looking back at everything that led them there. And that's where this energy becomes surprisingly emotional. I keep feeling somebody revisiting the past from an entirely different perspective. Not because somebody forced them to. Not because they're being pressured. But because distance has a way of changing what people notice. Things that once felt ordinary suddenly seem important. Things that were taken for granted suddenly feel valuable. And honestly, Gemini, that's exactly what this person appears to be struggling with right now. The Five of Cups feels very present around them. Not dramatic, not loud, just heavy. Like somebody quietly sitting with their own thoughts and realizing there are moments they wish they could experience differently. Conversations they wish they had handled differently. Opportunities they wish they had recognized while they still had them. Because I don't think this person expected your energy to affect them this much once there was space between you. I think they genuinely believe there would always be another chance, another conversation, another opportunity, another day. And when people believe they have unlimited time, they often postpone the things that matter most. You know, they assume important people will still be there tomorrow. They assume meaningful connections can simply wait. But life doesn't always work that way. And I feel like this person is beginning to understand that. Wow. The more I sit with this energy, the more I feel them looking at you differently now. Not because you've changed, but because their perspective has changed. Sometimes distance doesn't create feelings. Sometimes it reveals feelings that were already there. feelings that got buried underneath distractions, responsibilities, ego, fear, pride, and I keep sensing this moment where they suddenly recognize something they overlooked. Not a grand dramatic realization, more like a quiet truth. A truth that's difficult to ignore once you've seen it. Because the judgment card keeps appearing around this energy, and it feels like someone finally hearing their own inner voice after spending a very long time avoiding it. They're starting to see patterns, starting to see decisions, starting to see how certain choices created the situation they're currently sitting in. And for some of you, I feel like this person is recognizing that they spent too much time focusing on what could go wrong, too much time protecting themselves, too much time convincing themselves that vulnerability was dangerous. Meanwhile, the connection itself kept asking them to be honest, to be open, to be present. And now they find themselves looking backward and wondering how things might have felt if they had shown up differently. Okay, the Seven of Pentacles energy feels incredibly reflective. This isn't somebody rushing around trying to escape their emotions anymore. This feels slower, more thoughtful, more mature, like they're actually sitting with their feelings instead of running from them. And what they're discovering isn't particularly comfortable, because every memory seems to carry new meaning now. Moments they barely noticed before suddenly feel significant. Moments where you showed patience. Moments where you showed care. Moments where you stayed when other people might have left. Those memories seem louder now than they were back then. And I think that's where some of the regret comes from. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't fully understand what they had while they were experiencing it. The Hermit energy feels almost unavoidable here. I keep seeing somebody pulling away from noise, pulling away from outside opinions, pulling away from distractions, trying to hear their own truth. And what they're finding isn't necessarily easy, because sometimes self-awareness arrives with uncomfortable realizations. Sometimes growth begins with admitting things to yourself that you've spent months avoiding, and one of those realizations feels connected to you, connected to your value, connected to your presence, connected to the role you've played in their life. Because I don't feel them looking at you through the same lens anymore. The version of you they once assumed would always be there feels different now, more precious, more meaningful, more difficult to replace. And the strange thing is, the more they acknowledge that truth, the harder it becomes to dismiss the feeling that something important slipped through their fingers while they were busy looking somewhere else. And once somebody stops running from the truth, they eventually reach a point where silence becomes heavier than honesty. That's the feeling I'm stepping into now. Because this person doesn't seem focused on avoiding their emotions anymore. They're focused on what they never said, the words that stayed stuck in their throat, the explanations they kept postponing, the conversations they convinced themselves could wait until another day. The Page of Cups feels incredibly vulnerable here, not dramatic, not perfect, not rehearsed, just vulnerable. And that's important because I don't think this person wants to keep hiding behind the version of themselves they've been showing the world. That version knows how to stay composed. That version knows how to appear unaffected. That version knows how to keep everything under control. But underneath that mask, there's another version, a much more honest version. A version that's tired of pretending certain feelings don't exist. And I keep feeling them replaying imaginary conversations with you. Not arguments, not fantasies, conversations. The kind that happen when someone finally says what they should have said a long time ago. Maybe they imagine explaining themselves. Maybe they imagine admitting they handled things poorly. Maybe they imagine telling you what was really happening behind the scenes while you were left trying to make sense of their behavior. Because the truth is, I don't think they believe you saw the entire picture. I think they know you experienced the consequences of their choices. But there's a part of them that still wants you to understand why those choices happened. Wow. The Ace of Swords arrives and the energy becomes incredibly clear. This person is getting tired of carrying around unfinished sentences. You know those moments when someone thinks about reaching out 100 times before they actually do it? That's what this feels like. Thought after thought, scenario after scenario, conversation after conversation, and every version keeps leading them back to the same place. The truth, not the comfortable truth, the real truth. The truth that requires accountability. The truth that requires courage. The truth that leaves no room for hiding. And honestly, that's probably what makes this so difficult. Because honesty sounds simple until it requires vulnerability. Until it requires someone to say, this is how I actually felt. This is what I was afraid of. This is why I pulled away. This is why I acted the way I did. Okay, the Justice card feels very strong around this energy. Not because they're looking for forgiveness. Not because they're trying to rewrite history. It feels more like they want balance. They want things to be understood correctly. They want their side of the story to exist alongside yours. Because right now I feel somebody carrying the weight of things left unresolved. And unresolved situations have a strange way of following people, especially when emotions are involved, especially when somebody still cares. I also keep sensing this growing discomfort whenever they realize how long they've stayed silent, because every day that passes seems to make the conversation feel bigger in their mind, more important, more intimidating, more necessary. And the funny thing is, the more they think about it, the more they realize there may never be a perfect moment, no perfect script, no perfect outcome, no guarantee that every word will come out exactly right, which means eventually they have to choose between waiting forever or speaking honestly. And that's where the Eight of Wands energy starts appearing. Fast, direct, restless. Like thoughts that have spent too much time trapped inside someone's mind. Thoughts that want movement. Thoughts that want expression. Thoughts that no longer feel comfortable sitting in silence. I don't even feel like this person is trying to impress you anymore. That's not what this energy feels like. This feels more personal than that. More genuine. Because the closer they get to facing their truth, the less interested they become in maintaining appearances. The mask becomes exhausting. The distance becomes exhausting. The pretending becomes exhausting. And what remains underneath all of that is somebody who has been carrying words they haven't spoken. Words connected to feelings. Words connected to regrets. Words connected to everything they never allowed themselves to say when the opportunity was standing right in front of them. And maybe that's what changes everything. Not the feelings, not the attraction, not the memories. Those have been here for a while. What feels different now is the way they're looking at the future. Because for the first time, I don't feel somebody asking, what do I feel? I feel somebody asking, what do I want? And that's a very different question. The Ace of Pentacles arrives with a much more grounded energy, less fantasy, less confusion, less emotional chaos. This feels like someone beginning to think about possibilities in a practical way, about what something could actually look like if they stopped standing on the sidelines of their own life. Because I think they're realizing something important. Feelings by themselves don't build anything. Thoughts don't build anything. Regret doesn't build anything. At some point, somebody has to decide whether a connection deserves effort, whether it deserves time, whether it deserves presence. And that's where this person seems to be arriving internally, not because everything suddenly became easy, but because avoiding the connection hasn't given them the peace they thought it would. You know, there comes a moment when someone stops asking how to escape a feeling and starts asking what that feeling is trying to teach them. And that's what this energy feels like. A shift in perspective, a shift in priorities, a shift in maturity. Because when I look at the Two of Cups, I don't see somebody obsessing over what they can get. I see somebody recognizing what they value. And honestly, Gemini, that's not always the same thing. A lot of people chase excitement. A lot of people chase validation. A lot of people chase temporary distractions. But when those things fade away, what remains is the question of who genuinely matters. Who feels real? Who feels meaningful? Who feels different? And I keep sensing this person reaching that realization. Wow. The Six of Cups feels incredibly emotional here, because they're not only thinking about what happened, they're thinking about what it meant. That's the difference. The memories aren't showing up as random snapshots anymore. They're showing up with emotional weight attached to them. A conversation means more now. A shared moment means more now. A simple memory means more now. And it's strange because sometimes people don't recognize the value of an experience until they can no longer access it whenever they want. Sometimes distance becomes the thing that reveals importance. And I feel like this person understands that more than they used to, because there was a time when they assumed life would simply continue as it always had. That opportunities would remain available, that certain connections would always be waiting. But now I feel them looking at things with far more appreciation, far more awareness, far more gratitude. And honestly, I think part of that awareness comes from realizing how difficult you are to replace. Not because you're perfect, nobody is, but because your energy is unique to them, the way you challenged them, the way you understood them, the way you made them think, the way you made them feel. Those things don't automatically appear in every connection. Okay, the Ten of Pentacles brings in a completely different atmosphere, a bigger atmosphere, because this person doesn't seem focused only on the present moment anymore. Their thoughts keep stretching further ahead, further than they used to, further than they expected. And I keep getting this feeling that they're beginning to understand the difference between temporary emotions and lasting value. Because attraction can come and go, excitement can come and go, even fear can come and go. But some connections leave an imprint. Some people become part of your story whether you planned for it or not. And that's what this feels like. Not a passing chapter, not a random encounter, not something easily forgotten. This feels like somebody recognizing that your presence has shaped them in ways they didn't fully appreciate at the time. And the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to imagine moving forward as if none of this mattered. Because somewhere along the way, without fully realizing it, they stopped seeing you as someone who was simply part of their life and started seeing you as someone whose absence created a space that nothing else has been able to fill. And maybe that's the most important thing to remember here, Gemini. Sometimes people don't fully understand what a connection means until they've had enough distance to see it clearly. Sometimes feelings become louder in the silence than they ever were in the noise. Whether this person is still sorting through their emotions, reflecting on the past, or gathering the courage to be more honest with themselves, one thing feels very clear throughout this reading: you left an impact, and not the kind that fades overnight, the kind that stays with someone, the kind that makes them think, the kind that quietly changes the way they see things. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate your energy, your presence, and every moment we've shared in this reading. If this message resonated with your journey, take what feels right for you and leave the rest. Be gentle with yourself, keep trusting your own wisdom, and remember, your story is still being written. Take care of yourselves, Gemini, and I'll see you again very soon. Okay, bye for now.